I would stay far, far away from this area. Two things make ice: visible moisture and freezing or below. And as an IFR pilot, you need to be aware of the freezing level. So if you're an IMC, you're on a cross country with some altitude, you're not going to be getting very far, my friend. Hey everybody, welcome back to AeroSafe. I'm Erica Gilbert. I'm a flight instructor and instrument instructor located in Central Kentucky. Here on AeroSafe, we dive into FAA-approved sources of aviation weather. And using those weather products, we give an analysis of the weather specific to general aviation pilots. So what that looks like is a breakdown in terms of areas of VFR weather and areas of IFR weather. Then we look a little bit deeper and assess the hazards that could exist within both of those areas. The goal is that you can use the information within this video to enhance your understanding and knowledge of conditions as they exist and make a decision that'll help keep you and your family and your passengers safe. Alan Hawes asked a question. You talked about the ceiling of 5,000 at the airport over Penn. Is that MSL or AGL? But the real question is the VFR minimum is 3,152 there, meaning 3 statute miles of visibility, 1,000 feet above clouds, 500 feet below, and 2,000 horizontally. What do you think is safe for a Cessna 172? When does it transition from legal to unsafe scud running? Do you have any recommendations for personal minimums for new pilots? Great question, Alan. When we look at weather and we talk about ceiling height, it's always in above ground level, not MSL. As for the second part of your question, keep an eye out for a video later this week and the AeroSafe recommendations for personal minimums for new pilots. Great question, Alan. Thanks so much. All right, let's get started as we always do, looking at the current surface analysis. Time right now is 12:30 Eastern, 17:30 Zulu. All right, so this surface analysis chart is an hour old. If we look at the date and time, December 10th, 16:38 Zulu, just under an hour old. We have a lot going on, all right? Being that I live in Kentucky, that's where my eyes go first. And we've got this big cold front with lots of low pressure systems that come through. This black line here, which you often can see depicted in another way. So that line represents a squall line. Saturday night in Western Kentucky did have some tornadoes. So we know that cold fronts can produce squall line thunderstorms. It's the worst of the worst weather, right? It's an impenetrable thunderstorm along the whole leading edge of that cold front and can produce tornadoes, thunderstorms, and all of the hazards associated with that. So that's a really yucky spot. I would not want to be there right now. As we move up into New England, we see the cold front persists and is topped by low pressure, where the warm front meets the low pressure. And then there's a stationary front up top. Another cold front moving in, currently over the most western part of Kentucky, eastern Arkansas, moves up to the low pressure. And then we see a trough there as well. High pressure persists over a large portion of the central US, but then that does begin to be disrupted over here, over the Four Corners, and northwest bound from there. We see lots of troughs, stationary front going down over Mexico, low pressure systems preceding high pressure systems, troughs connecting those, more high pressure, more low pressure, and cold fronts up towards the northwest. So just looking at this, of course, for now, eastern US would be IFR weather with lots of hazards attached to the squall line. So now we can look at the interactive map and get a little bit better idea of what's going on. I'm going to turn off the air met layers. We're going to look first at the METARs and TAFs. This will give us a good indication of the flight category for these airports across the country. We do see that in the central southern US, there is a lot of VFR weather reported, VFR flight category reported, with clear skies as indicated by the open report. Along eastern US, we see the picture is not so pretty. Well, I mean, it is if you like colors, but in terms of how we interpret those colors, we know it's not going to be so pretty. We've got ceilings across the eastern part of the US, except for in southern Florida. We know there are ceilings because the holes are filled in completely. That means there's an overcast layer. Now, where there are green bubbles, that must mean that the overcast layer is above 3,000 feet. So we'll click on this, Columbus. We see overcast at 3,400, 10 statute miles of visibility. Nice, fairly light winds, 300 at 7 knots. There is that overcast layer at 3,400. So, you know, if you're a VFR pilot, you could stay close for a local flight, but you would really want to pay attention to ceilings if you're going out across country along your route of flight, and the trend, which looking at west of Columbus, the trend appears to be deteriorating weather. Up in the far northeast, Maine, we see low IFR. So visibility less than a mile or less than 500-foot ceilings. We see overcast at 300 feet. Definitely IFR weather. Definitely need to assess if that's within your personal minimums for takeoff. If we pull up the AirMet Zulu, icing, absolutely no doubt. Moderate icing between freezing level and flight level 220. The freezing level is somewhere between 3,000 and 1,200. Based on this, now, so what's interesting about this is that we see the freezing levels are actually fairly high up in the northeast. And why would that be? Well, as we move further west, the freezing levels move down and south because of that cold front that's passing through and making all of that really bad weather. So preceding that cold front was warm air over here, now over the Atlantic. That warm air brings the freezing level higher up in altitude, clearly, because the freezing level right now in Maine is somewhere between 3,000 and 10,000, and this freezing level depiction shows that it's at about 8,000. And as an IFR pilot, you need to be aware of the freezing level. Freezing level is somewhere between the surface and 4,000. So if you're an IMC, you're on a cross country with some altitude, you're not going to be getting very far, my friend. You will be accumulating ice pretty quickly. Over North Texas here in Oklahoma, freezing levels between the surface and 4,000, and that whole mass continues all the way up into North Dakota and Montana up there. So pretty low freezing level. However, when does the freezing level really become of concern? When there's visible moisture, right? Two things make ice: visible moisture and freezing or below. That's when icing is a concern. Georgia, Alabama, northern Florida, freezing level is 1,200. So there is some VFR weather. There are some VFR weather conditions, but the freezing is not the concern there. Severe weather and our SIGMETs. So we have a convective SIGMET outlook over that area. And a convective SIGMET in this white box. Embedded thunderstorms moving at 35 knots. Tops are up to flight level 440. There are tornadoes, wind gusts at 55 knots possible. This whole area where that squall line is on the leading edge of the cold front, that's a no-go situation. You're gonna encounter conditions that could cause substantial damage to the aircraft, let alone to yourself. When we talk about turbulence, and turbulence being a hazard associated with convective activity and thunderstorms, most people think about doing structural damage to the aircraft. A greater concern could also be damage, physical damage to the occupants of the aircraft. This whole area is a no-go, VFR or IFR, and it looks like there's not a whole lot of VFR weather to be had in here. I would stay far, far away from this area. Honestly, that is the kind of weather that would kill you. And if you somehow, by some terrible fluke, wound up in that, you may wish you were dead. Now I'm just curious, for the sake of being curious. Let's look and see if there's anybody flying over there right now. Looks like there are a couple of airplanes. And my guess is that they're finding little holes, or they are above it. A citation at 40,000 feet and a Lear at 45,000 feet. There's really not a lot of airplanes flying here. You see a lot of people trying to avoid it. Look, people are coming up the eastern coast here, trying to get up and around. We as general aviation pilots need to steer very clear from what's going on. Let's look at the whole contiguous US with SIGMETs and AirMets on. SIGMET Papa. Occasional severe turbulence below 180. Low level winds and mountain wave. Look, that is VFR weather there. And we see moderate turbulence. We see a couple more AirMets for moderate turbulence, both high and low from the surface, essentially up to 43,000 feet. So while the weather is reporting VFR there, it does look like, you know, severe turbulence is a big deal. That is absolutely no go. We also see overwhelmingly it's VFR, but the ceilings are not super high. So we see here at Dixon, it's overcast 4,200. In the relatively flat parts of the country, that's plenty of ceiling to make a safe journey under VFR on a cross country. But we see this purple AirMet here, and that is mountain obscuration by mist, clouds, or precipitation. Now, of course, if there's mountain obscuration going on, you would need an instrument rating, and you would need to fly under instrument flight rules, and you would need to be especially cautious for maintaining your altitude, your safe altitude. So we talked earlier about all the low pressure and cold fronts coming in through the northwest as well, and we see, just like last Wednesday, that there's a lot of similar themes going on. We have turbulence from the surface all the way up to 43,000 feet. Again, we also have low-level wind shear, airspeed loss or gain of 20 knots or more below 2,000 feet AGL. Of course, unsafe, most notably on takeoff and final. Immediate loss of 20 knots could put you below the stall speed, which would mean you're no longer flying, and that is obviously an unsafe situation. We also see icing, of course, because it's cold up there and there is visible moisture. General aviation aircraft, small piston aircraft, are not certificated for flight into known icing. Training and equipment are used to get you out of a dangerous situation, not used to get you into one. You do not need to rocket off towards the northwest here, knowing that there's going to be icing conditions. Your equipment can only do so much. Further, what if you get yourself into this situation and you haven't used that equipment before? First of all, do you know how to use it properly? Second of all, do you know the limitations of that equipment? And third, when's the last time you used it or tested its operational ability? Northwest, I'd stay out of there. Also, mountains over Colorado, I'd stay away from there as well. That is not looking good. So if we were to look at areas of VFR weather, that's going to be largely the southwest part of the country, from California all the way over to the back end of that cold front that we saw come through. We've got VFR weather stretching from Texas all the way up to North Dakota, but we do have ice. We do have some icing that is fairly low level, which is surface to 4,000 and up to 17,000. So if you're able to stay below the clouds in that area and stay away from the visible moisture and the below freezing temperatures. You'll be perfectly safe. In terms of areas of IFR, it's looking pretty similar to the last few times we've done this. We've got the northwest, of course. We've got low ceilings and freezing between the surface and 8,000 feet. So that's no-go situation up there. It's IFR and there's a lot of icing. The eastern border of the US, we see lots of IFR. All of that's related to that cold front coming through, which has created some squall line where there is not icing, which is the far northeast. There is convective activity and squall line thunderstorms. So that's no-go over there. Let's take a moment to look at the prog charts. 12 hours from now, that cold front will have moved through most of the way. There will still be chance to likelihood of rain throughout the eastern US, and where it's cold, it's going to be either a wintry mix or frozen precipitation. Similar thing going on up in the northwest. We're going to have precipitation and a trough coming through connected to that low pressure and that cold front, creating some bad weather. Now we do have that low pressure with troughs extending basically north to south along the entire contiguous US. When that shows some vertical development and some clouds and storm and precipitation. If we move to the 24-hour surface prog, we see that that cold front has now moved all the way off the coast into the Atlantic. Low pressure system is still hanging out over the northeast. High pressure's pushing through, and as that cold front moves out, we're going to see weather that is improving over the southeast US. Now that is going to be followed again by those low pressures and troughs. We've got high pressure over the four corners here, and still lots of precipitation up in the northwest. 36 hours from now, oh wow, things look really different. That low pressure seems to have just disappeared entirely. We're going to have a cold front coming down, a continental polar air mass that's going to bring in a cold front. High pressure over the southeast. There should be some really nice weather in the next couple of days. Far southwest, we do see a low pressure system developing with troughs that extend both north, south, and west. So we'll keep an eye on what's going on there. Looks like a lot of that weather up in the northwest is going to somewhat dissipate as this high pressure system moves in. Let's look at that 48-hour prog chart. Nice, that looks really nice. That looks a lot better. High pressure throughout the whole East Coast. There should be some really nice flying days coming up for all of us. That cold front coming in, I'll be really curious to see what happens as that moves closer. We have primarily high pressure systems throughout the country. That low pressure is going to be hanging out still on the south side of California and New Mexico. Snow over Colorado, southern Idaho, but for the most part, pretty clear. If you have any questions about anything I talked about today, please leave a comment below and I'll address it in the next video and answer your questions. Now we do see a lot of troughs on the surface analysis chart today. So my question for you is, what is a trough and why does it matter for pilots? If you answer the question in the comments below, I'll then reach out to you and send you a little AeroSafe sticker. You can put it on your headset or your flight bag or your computer or your iPad. Thanks for watching today. Please tune in next time. Can't wait to chat later. Bye.